Hey everyone, welcome back. This is your facilitator for this session on Holocaust, which is part of our series for A-level Cambridge World History course 9489. So, in the last session, which was primarily an introduction to the overall topic, forwards into the entire episode, how it is significant in world history, especially if you look into 20th century, it will be partial. If an event like this, where 6 million, close to 6 million, or more than 6 million lives were taken just because they were born a particular race, a particular religion, that was the crime. So, uh, the lecture is there. You can always log on to that. We will be moving further today, and we start with the historical context. Anti-Semitism. I think this is the best time to differentiate between anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. Holocaust is a phenomena that is, although it evolved in the 20th century between 1933 and 45, where the Nazis, they were responsible for systematic and barbaric uh, massacre of Jews, uh, being the primary victim to the most of the extent, along with other segments which were unwanted by Nazi ideology. This included minorities like Roma, which are the gypsies, natives of that area, plus homosexuals, disabled. These were something which were tagged as unwanted for the Nazis, Third Reich under the Führer Hitler, and for that they were first moved to concentration camp and later to extermination camp, and then various means to slaughter them. That was insanity. Anyhow, we remain to the topic. So it was first used by New York Times, and this term Holocaust was used in 1895, and it was initially referred to the way Ottomans, uh, owing to their rivalry with Armenian Christians, uh, the genocide of Armenian Christians is referred to as the Holocaust when we look towards the evolve of this term, and it literally means burnt offering. That is to put somebody at the altar. That's how um, you can look into it. But that primarily, when it is used in the context of history, this is between 1933 and 1945. The persecution starts then. By 1945, the phenomena we know as the final solution, that we will cover in detail toward later half of this lecture series. So it ended with that final solution and the loss of so many lives. There's no explanation to it. In Jewish scripture, in biblical terms, it is referred to as Shoah, uh, which is which means a calamity, a disaster, and that is the calamity on the Jews of Europe, which unfolded in the shape of the Holocaust. And away from that, we move to anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is as old as the traces of world history are. So we move to the evolution, and the first traces are found in third century before Christ, and at that time in Alexandria, Jews was persecuted in the name of religion and absolute monarchy, because it was under the Roman Empire at that time, and the Greek, and owing to Jews practicing their own way of life, their own scripture, their own code of life, and the Bible, and based on that, they were persecuted. And the character in history that we refer to as Maneti, he was, as per documentation, a priest, which led this wave of oppression against Jews. And not only that, if you look into the historical accounts, they have been mocked as well for their different lifestyle and belief. Like when Alexandria was conquered, it was the day of Shabbat, and that is traditionally a Jew holiday, which is Saturday in every week, and that's where they refrain from working, hard work, as we can say it. So they mocked it as a as an entity which was having a lighter day while they were attacked. However, it has to do with their beliefs. So that's how they have. And one other thing which is very important is, while living under Roman or Greek rulers, their allegiance, as it was a customary thing, that was not with the empire. They derived their strength, the Jews, from the Bible, from the history, and that made them at odds with the ruling class. And as per accounts, the transformation of Roman Empire into Holy Roman Empire and acceptance of Christianity, that reflects a rise in this anti-Semitism era. And that's why the first thing you derive out of it is the religion divide has always been there when it comes to hostilities toward the Jews. So one important event is the Rhineland Massacre, 1096. That's primarily the timeline for the start of the crusade between the Christians and the Muslims, where it was more towards political plus a religious domination. That's the entire chapter, a very interesting one. And that's the conquest towards Jerusalem. Different leaders like Saladin Ayyubi was there from this side. The church was very active, rallying various kings from England, France, from time to time, to take on the lead as a holy responsibility to regain the lands, the holy lands, and then the bloodshed and everything. So the Rhineland Massacre is when the first campaign was launched for the crusade. It didn't went to the Jerusalem, but rather in the proximity, the Jews were settled in Rhineland, and as per account, 2,000 Jews were killed in the name of religion, and would commonly refer to one of the commander of the crusade. He was quoted as saying, "The blood of the Jew is holier than the blood of the Muslim," and that's what made them, at the times of crusade, the enemy number one. Anyhow, now post that, we have Edict of Expulsion, 1290. So it was a decree, a royal order by Edward Bourne in 1290, and owing to the hostilities of the local community, his subjects, and other overarching political religious reasons, they were expelled for conspiring against the empire and other factors. And upon expulsion, it is most tragic thing is, for 350 years it wasn't reversed, it remained in action. So effectively from 1290 till 1640, over and above, the English didn't have any Jew population, they were expelled. That's not far away from what happened during the Second World War. We'll come to it. It was more towards the final solution. One school of thought says it was owing to the confusion, otherwise all they wanted was to expel them initially, and when that wasn't happening because the Germans under Hitler, they weren't winning the war, and for that it was a confused decision to go for the final solution, that is for the extermination, when knowing well it wasn't possible at all. and there was no probability. Then the tragedy of Black Death, 1348 to 51, where the plague swept across the Europe, claiming most probably one-third of the lives, and we can have a correction regarding that as well. So it was so massive, and we have lived in an era of COVID. We're already in that era, however, if you recall 2021 when it started, and everything in mystery, disease, and people falling, and all the R&D, everything helpless. Imagine in 1348, people dying right next to you, and you have no idea what is happening actually. So the masses, not encouraged by the church, not at all, because it was already in the grip of this crisis. So there was, as per accounts, no official endorsement from the church towards this persecution of the Jews, but the context was that they were popularly believed for poisoning the wells, and whoever went to the wells, fetched water or consumed it, they were falling ill, and for that it was believed that the Jews had done it. And overall, the percentage of casualties or the infection, the Black Death, it was very low in Jewish communities, which were a little segregated from the main subjects, and being excluded, that might have saved the Jews, because they were not using the public wells, they had their own arrangement, they were quite confined, and that basically isolated them from whatever was happening outside. But unfortunately, masses blamed them, and many of them lost their life, and that is the Black Death. Then we have 2 centuries of disturbance in Spain. That was, as per popular understanding, it's basically the closeness of the Jews in Spain to the power corridors, which made them enemy number one once the transition took place, and that put them in the receiving end. And then there is a series of persecution that Jews were subjected and which led to countless lives being lost. And the Kozak Massacre of Ukraine, 1648. So at that time, the dominant forces were Muscovy, as we know it, the Moscow, Ukraine, the Cossacks of Ukraine, which are in the later time, when they were part of the Russian Empire, they formed the Royal Guards, the special unit from Ukraine. So at that time, the Tatars of Caucasus, Crimean, they were pretty active at that time, and it was quite different the way it's the Crimean Tatars and the Cossacks. They formed the major party, and the other side at that time it was the Commonwealth of Poland. So what was happening, which became the precursor, was some land reforms, and being from the nobility in terms of power corridors, it was the Jews who were leading from the front, reclaiming the lands and turning them into their territory. So that friction led to a confrontation between, it's my mistake if I pronounce it wrong, but Kamensky, he was a Ukrainian Kozak, and he was deprived of his land, and there was a history of injustice with his family, which basically led him to gather support of Crimean Tatars for a war against the Commonwealth of Poland to change the status quo, reduce the influence of the Jewish lobby that was there. And then there was a series of battle. It was both the parties getting the upper hand from time to time. However, it was an era of turbulence, and the Jews, they suffered a lot during this episode. And then we have what we refer to as pogroms in Russia, that is 19th and 20th century. Originally, Russia didn't had any noticeable Jew population, but when they annexed territories like when they were expanding, when they annexed territories like Ukraine and parts of Poland, that's where a sizable population was inherited by the Russian Empire. However, it was quite it wasn't that comfortable with the presence of another religious group to roam freely and practice within the domains of the Russian Empire, uh, which was very much controlling its masses on the context of religion. So they were able to highlight this threat, and for that reason they were excluded, not free to travel, lot of restrictions, and they were very much confined to certain quarters to survive. And during this, the programs itself refers to mass shooting. You gather the enemy in a close controlled environment, and then they are butchered by firing squad or any other means. So this is what was the history of pogroms. And one thing is very important, that the assassination of Nicholas in 1881, that's a very tragic and interesting episode. We will do it regarding how he was assassinated, the entire episode. Popularly, it was believed that Jewish orientation or the person of interest was of Jewish origin, and that was something which really went against the uh, already shattered repute of Jews, and they were persecuted based on that reason. Dreyfus Affair, that is um, towards the dawn of the 20th century, when French had suffered a series of defeat, especially from Prussians, and they were forced to seize certain territories, which was very critical and symbolically very important. So, to settle the blame for that defeat, where they were found as sitting hens in terms of their opposition and everything. So, what happened was that they had to put the blame, and there was a young officer with the name Dreyfus. He had Jewish origins, and he was portrayed as the person who had passed secrets to the enemy, which helped them uh, manage the defenses of the French, and they were easily routed. And for that, he was blamed, and then an inquiry took place, and he was sentenced, quite harsh sentence as per treason. However, during the trial, the popular belief amongst certain sector of nobility was that this was something which was overdone. The proofs are not sufficient, and later a re-inquiry, it placed the blame on a French military officer rather than Dreyfus for the entire episode, and they had the confession. So that is where the entire French society was divided between anti-Semitists who were not ready to listen to any logic. For them, the sacred duty was to just be a part of this thing. And anyhow, let's move further. And now we come to, after going through the historical context, we come to the racist ideas in Europe when before the time of Nazis, and that is the Third Reich. So historically, we have touched many features of the Europe, but one is very important, as that it is a general agreement that the technological, medical, and psychological, and these advances in terms of scientific research, they were somehow misinterpreted into a definition of superiority of certain race to another, and the world being a pretty bad place in terms of guaranteeing peace. So, whichever species, uh, in terms of race, it it was superior and was able to adopt itself. It survived, it remained, while the other it wasn't able to adopt, and with time they perished. So, one of theories, social Darwinism, totally puts the case of the Jews upside down, and that is the way it was interpreted. And the context was that the race is permanent, and that is what defines all the attributes. However, apart from that, rest things are unplanned, and it being in a world where there is no guarantee of security in terms of the state or apparatus, it is the best way to have maximum regret towards social Darwinism. We come back to it. There was another discussion which was coming in between. So instead of mankind being evolved as a species, it was rather a conflict of the race, and the superior one with more firm belief and attributes ought to survive while the other vanishes away. So this was translated in a very different manner by the Nazis during their period of persecution of the Jews, and they drew upon this argument in justifying, and as per accounts, the age of colonization, where Asia, Africa, and Latin America, it was being colonized by various powers, imperial powers in Europe. The strong belief became that it is now a noble duty to reform the people who are unaware of modern technology. And for that, they remained in presence in all countries from there where they ended up their rule. They kept them linked so that they are able to grasp upon new things that are happening. All right. Now, what made this thing more lethal was that the attributes, actually, the religion was separated from the existence, which is the genes, which is the race, and it was through social Darwinism put forward that even if the religion has been adopted, the attributes which are racial, they remain. There is no second effect, second argument in that, and for that reason, the Jews were to be persecuted because in history they have committed some very unpopular acts like crucifixion and these sort of things, which create the divide, and based on that, they were an element of target. And this is what is very important, that it is, if you analyze this entire context, it is the race versus religion, because the things as they move towards uh, the final solution, it is clear that at the end of the day, it is the game plan that powers. Unjustified ideas based on dubious scientific research that leads to incomplete conclusion, and that is the case when spiritual was categorized in terms of race, and those born with different uh, religious blocks. It was a very case-to-case basis analysis that remained. So we further move to the context that over and above these old vested sentiments of hate against the Jews in Europe, it was very precisely used as a political tool. It was the age of awakening, the Marxist ideas, the socialist upheaval, and the popular debate that was taking its toll on the previous empires and their ruling the ruling families. They were facing the heat during this time, and it was very openly used as a political tool apart from other reasons. For instance, Hitler himself, he was of the view that Austrian uh, famous politicians like von Schoner and Karl Lunger. Karl Lunger, they both were were his inspiration because they were openly anti-Semitic and they called for complete boycott and expulsion. So it was very effectively and